Hey everyone, it's Selwen here, and today we're talking about the Frost Decay. Now before we talk about the Frost Decay, look at this. Just look at this. Isn't this breathtaking? God damn. Anyway, I find myself lost in Shadowlands quite often, but let's talk about the Frost Decay. So, the Frost Decay, much like Unholy, hasn't changed overly much, okay? So, it's still the same Frost Decay that you have known for the past 4 years, pretty much. At its core, still pretty much plays the same. But we do get a couple of interesting and a couple of very cool things. And the one is this two-handed weapon, okay? Which is very, very cool. A lot of people jizz all over this. The idea of finally being a Frost Decay with a two-handed weapon. And I'm myself included. I love myself a Frost Decay with a two-handed weapon. Obliterates feel so much better. They feel the weapon adds a sense of impact to the spec that dual wield simply cannot provide. Again, especially on Obliterates and even Frost Strikes. The issue with this is that, well, it comes down to a little bit of numbers, which I don't want to talk about too much, because obviously it's very early. But one thing that goes amiss in using a two-handed weapon on Frost is rune forges. Because with a two-handed weapon, you're only going to be able to use one rune forge, unless Blizzard, for some reason, adds the ability for you to add two, like in dual wield. So you're going to be stuck, likely, with Fallen Crusader. But you're going to miss Razor Eyes. That's a lot of frost damage that you are losing. You also might miss on the new rune of Hysteria, which is providing more runic power and extra generation of the said runic power. So, that's a handicap in using a two-handed weapon, by the looks of things. By the looks of things. Do take it that with a grain of salt. But besides that, yes, it's awesome. It is very, very awesome. So, besides that, another very cool thing is this. Our dragon is now baseline, okay? They made it baseline, back to being baseline from Legion, and that is fantastic. Why? Because this tier, where it once was, sucked. Because we either had to choose between this very cool and quite iconic. It's a fantastic ability that fits perfectly into the fantasy of playing a Frost Decay, right? And you had to choose between that and Gathering Storm, which sucked, or even Glacial Advance, that sometimes is pretty good. So now it's been made baseline, so this opens that tier for you to freely go to Gathering Storm or the new Hypothermic Presence, which does have its issues, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit. Before we get there, there's a couple of new abilities which are back due to the impruning, and that one is Leechborn. Leechborn, again, like the Unholy Decay, very cool to have back. It gives you Leech and makes you immune to Charm, Fear, and Sleep. So it's further making you into an unstoppable force, which is the fantasy of the Decay, because we are slow as fuck. Okay, so so that's great. The other great thing is Anti-Magic Zone, which is providing extra utility to the group. Okay, this is very, very cool, it looks cool, and it's awesome to have back. And it's very unique as well. Not a lot of classes, if any, bring a utility buff, a damage reduction buff, such as this. Maybe besides Disc Priest, rather. The other abilities that you get is your Ghoul. So you get a Ghoul back. So you can summon a Ghoul for 1 minute. This was in a game way back in the day. And, he doesn't do much. It basically is just there for you to use Sacrificial Pact, which is essentially a self-heal, and is a pretty cool thematic ability to have in a Decay class. The other two ones are a bit of a miss. So the unpruned abilities on Frost Decays are a hit and miss, and the miss abilities are Death and Decay, and Death Coil, okay? Death and Decay and Death Coil. Now, why is that? Well, because they simply do not fit into the spec. Okay, they do not fit into your rotation. It does not fit into the fantasy of the spec, because you're not going to spend runic power on a Death Coil. The damage is not worth over a Frost Strike. You're also not going to spend it on a Death and Decay, because its damage is not worth the rune that you could otherwise spend on an Obliterate or a Frost Sight. Okay, so it does feel clunky. However, there is a Covenant ability that will improve Death and Decay, which is very weird, but we'll get to that in a minute. Besides that, the only use that I found for Death and Decay and Death Coil is in Torghast, because in Torghast you do get enemy powers that are not strictly spec-based, and you do get a couple of enemy powers that improve Death and Decay and Death Coil to have a niche use. So there you go. So on to talents. Oh, actually before talents, we also get a new pretty cool ability. Now, gameplay-wise, it's not going to mean much, but Killing Machine will now cause your Obliterate to also deal Frost damage. Now, the reason why this is awesome is because Frost Decay has always had the issue throughout an expansion that their scaling was kind of messed up, especially on Obliterates, because Obliterates only deal physical damage, and your Mastery increases the Frost damage that you do. And Obliterate was the only ability that you have that is based on physical damage. So Killing Machine rank 2 at level 58 will improve the scaling of the Frost Decays, which is awesome. Okay? So, talents. Now on talents, besides the new ability, which we're going to talk about in a bit, they pretty much stay the same. And the problem that I have with the Frost Decay talents is in the first tier, I think that Cold Heart is simply not interesting. I mean, I cannot get into my brain that Chains of Ice is a DPS ability. It still feels super clunky to me. I don't like it. But besides that, which is subjective, Cold Heart simply kills this tier. We're gonna take this either way, at least for a single target, right? It's just that good. And you're not gonna take the other two in a realistic scenario. And I know this is a numbers discussion, but, I mean, we don't really need a lot of tuning to understand that Cold Heart is so much better than these other two. Now, I might be wrong, because again, number stuff, tuning, that will still happen, but I really don't like the first tier. All these other tiers are pretty much the same. However, we do get a nerf on the Frost Sight ability. Now, Frost Sight, pretty much like Cold Heart, kills this tier in AoE or any multi-target scenarios, because Frost Sight is that powerful, and is that fun. Now, what changed with it is that now it only strikes up to 5 enemies. Now, this is not a huge deal. Okay, a lot of melees had their abilities nerfed to have a target cap. Your Howling Blast doesn't, your Remorseless Winter doesn't as well, but your Frost Sight does. Now, in normal situations, this is not a problem, okay? This only affects Mythic Plus to, this is an effort by Blizzard to tone down AoE Mythic Plus, like those huge pools that people do in Mythic Plus currently in BFI. So these changes are to counteract that. Personally, I do not like them, but I do understand them, and for the most part, it's not a big deal, okay? But just letting you know that Frost Sight is indeed a little bit nerfed. So, the Hypothermic Presence. So this is the new tier, the new talent, rather. And first of all, this talent doesn't make sense on this tier. This tier is an AoE tier. Gathering Storm is for the most part an AoE talent, and so is Glacial Advance. Hypothermic Presence is not. It's simply a buff. Now this buff is heavily pushing you towards the Breath of Cindergrosa build. Okay, because it reduces the runic power cost of your ability, so that will help your windows tremendously so. Now, it does not trigger a global cooldown, which is fantastic. We already have 2, which are awful, and that's a discussion for us to have someday, maybe. Frost Decays have awful global cooldowns. It makes openers and setups absolutely dreadful. It kills what is somewhat a fast-paced spec down to a crawl in having to collect Pillars of Frost and Empower Rune Weapon on global cooldowns. I hate it. Okay? I really dislike that. So this one does not trigger, which is great, but is heavily, again, pushing you to the Breath build. But my issue with this ability is that it doesn't make sense in this tier, so maybe they will change that in future. As for the ability itself, you're pretty much gonna click it. Okay, you're just gonna click it before, as you enter your window, or a little bit after, depending what the numbers say when you should click it. But there's not much else to say about that. And the last tier again will come down to numbers stuff. Again, all the same as BFI. So Covenant abilities. Now, Covenant abilities for the Frosty K, much like in the Unholy, are not providing nothing super unique or super interesting. They are just fine. So for example, the Kyrian one, the Bastion one, is Shackle the Unworthy, which is just a dot that its cooldown gets reduced by runes that you spend. So yeah, it's an ability that you use on cooldown. You don't really think much about it besides using it as much as possible. Not very interesting. The Vinthier one is Swarming Mists, which does damage all around you, like Remorseless Winter. Looks super cool, and combining that with Remorseless Winter looks awesome. But it is an ability that also just deals damage, but does provide you a runic power, 15 to be exact, I think so, 15. And that will somewhat synergize with your breath build, as that will actually help trigger an extra hit with the breath. So there's a little bit of synergy there, but for the most part it's something that you also just gonna use on cooldown. Malthraxis one is super cool. You get this limb that also deals damage around you, like the Swarming Mists, but instead of giving you runic power, it's gonna grip enemies to you every 2 seconds, which is also pretty great. Adds an extra utility, but besides that, it's not really synergizing with the rest of the spec. And then the Night Fae is the weirdest one for Frost anyway, which is Death's Due. It's an improved Death and Decay, which looks beautiful, which is really weird for Decay, but hey. But it does provide you with a strength buff, depending how many enemies are inside of it, and also reduces the damage the enemies deal to you. Like Shackle the Unworthy also reduces the damage you take from the enemy. Now this one is pretty weird because obviously Death and Decay is not something that seemingly you're going to use, and Knife Fae is going to make you use that ability seemingly, even in single target. At least I would think so. So again, like the other ones, is not really synergizing much with the rest of the spec, outside of maybe you want to stack that up with your other cooldowns, but then it's another global cooldown on top of 2 awful global cooldowns that you already have, and yeah. I mean, just way too many global cooldowns, man. They really need to get that sorted so the spec flows better. Honestly, that's still the biggest issue with Frost right now, is global cooldowns. Obviously, there's minor issues with your talents and maybe some number stuff as we go deeper into the beta and stuff like that, but the global cooldowns, honestly, is what kills the spec. I hate it, man. It's so bad on Frost Decay, just like the mages. But anyway, it's pretty nice to have to end it back. It's pretty nice to have the big old dragon baseline. Cool to have Leechborn and all of that, but again, global cooldowns needs to be looked at. Alright guys, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.